Hello everybody and welcome to another superhero game review. For this one, I'm going to shake things up a little bit and look at a game centering around a superhero that isn't in the mainstream, part of the big two companies, Marvel or DC. The character I'm going to be looking at today is Cole McGrath, the main protagonist of the Infamous series of games, at least the first two. I haven't played Second Son, I don't own it, I'm not in any rush to play it, so we'll leave that one for a later date, maybe. I don't know yet. It might not even be necessary, and it doesn't even look interesting to me, so I'll probably pass on it. Anyways, Infamous was the brainchild of Sucker Punch Productions, and I remember when it was first announced, I was surprised the developer was moving in this kind of direction. I had only known them from the Sly Cooper series, and Infamous seemed like a radical departure from that, not only in terms of gameplay, but the overall tone and atmosphere of everything. Infamous centers around a bike messenger, the aforementioned Cole McGrath, who receives electricity-based superpowers after being caught in an explosion that destroys several blocks and ends countless lives in the fictional Empire City, located somewhere in the New York area of the United States. Cole had been delivering a strange device known as the Ray Sphere, the cause of the explosion, that has the power to unlock superhuman abilities within people that possess what is known as the conduit gene. Following the explosion, an event dubbed the Blast, Empire City becomes a desolate urban wasteland, full of violence and crime. The entire society collapses in on itself. The radioactive ray field energy from the Ray Sphere also poisons the vast majority of Empire City's inhabitants with a plague, and turns the entire city into a giant quarantine zone. Its connection to the rest of the world is severed, with its bridge to the mainland sealed, and the United States government even contemplates leveling it with a nuclear bomb. Finding himself within these new violent and hopeless surroundings, Cole uses the opportunity to learn how to control his powers, find out why he got them, and above all else, survive. Along the way, you will meet several side characters such as Trish Daly, Cole's ex-girlfriend who worked as a nurse prior to the blast, and has been helping the sick and injured in the city. Her sister Amy had been killed when the Ray Sphere went off, and she blames Cole for her death. A revolutionist going by the name of the Voice of Survival will also pop up, broadcasting himself on TVs scattered throughout Empire City. He has been labeling Cole a terrorist, and is partially responsible for Cole's fallout with Trish, spreading these lies. And then, of course, you have Zeke Jedediah Dunbar, Cole's best friend who not only provides moral support for him, but also aids him with his skills in electrical engineering. Zeke has a very funny personality, and injects a lot of humor into this otherwise dark and depressing story. He helps balance it out a little bit. I really enjoy this character, and I also enjoy the ideas Sucker Punch discusses with him. Zeke may be Cole's best friend, but he is jealous of what he can do, and feels sidelined at times, useless in certain instances, seen as an afterthought and not given the proper respect he deserves. Zeke might come off like a bit of a douchebag at times throughout the game, but I don't know, I think his actions are realistic and believable. If someone you knew got superpowers, you'd probably become envious towards them too, in some way, and it would affect your emotions and better judgment. So yeah, I didn't ever question his actions, regardless of how crazy some of them may have seemed in the latter parts of this story. Regarding Empire City, I think it's a pretty interesting setting for this kind of game, this kind of post-apocalyptic type story. You'd think it would get kind of boring and dull due to its depressing atmosphere and washed out colors and everything, but it's actually got a lot of personality to it. Some of the neon signs scattered throughout that get activated once you establish power to parts of the city add a bit of levity to the whole thing, represent life returning to those districts, energy in every sense of the word. In Infamous, you play as Cole and get to wield his electricity-based superpowers to take on the criminal scum of the city, as well as any other conduits that have been activated due to the Ray Sphere. that all have their own hidden agendas, and many of which have taken over districts in Empire City. You can fire lightning bolts and electrical missiles from your hands, release shockwave blasts to knock back enemies, throw balls of energy that explode like grenades, activate an electrical force field to protect you from gunfire and other projectiles, and an ultimate attack called the Electrical Storm that unleashes a devastating series of lightning strikes out of the sky, steered by the 6-axis control of the PS3, which surprisingly actually works. It's quite responsive. I'm impressed. In terms of traversal, you also have several abilities at your disposal, the main one being Cole's induction grind, that allows you to slide across telephone poles, subway tracks, and other such wires and cables. You also have static thrusters you can use to hover and glide limited distances, and a climbing mechanic similar to games like Assassin's Creed and Uncharted, though here it can be a bit clunky at times as Cole latches onto things automatically, almost like a magnet. If you are jumping or gliding into something, you have to be really precise with the analog stick, or you will overshoot what you are trying to land on, sometimes leading to your death in certain instances, which can be frustrating. I think Sucker Punch added as much variety as they could with Cole's powers here, did as much within the field of electricity as possible. The gameplay is really fun and unique compared to a lot of other superhero titles, especially at the time, and I think it holds up relatively well for a game that came out back in 2009. I also love how it finds ways to restrict your power a little bit too, by having you replenish your energy and health from nearby power sources, which you will have to do constantly, especially if you spam your stronger attacks like your shock grenades or megawatt hammer missiles. Infamous finds a perfect balance between being offensive and defensive with its gameplay and combat, and I don't think this kind of thing is seen in many superhero titles to this extent. They usually make you feel overpowered, always in control in some way. Here, Cole is a walking capacitor that will need to recharge if you go in guns blazing all the time. If you are low on electrical energy, you will be at a huge disadvantage, far more vulnerable to incoming attacks. In some parts of the game, you will be forced to venture into districts of the city that are off the grid, that aren't powered by electricity, making it all the more difficult to find energy sources Cole can feed off of. At this point, you will need to enter the sewer system to turn the power back on, which also gives you a new ability each time as a reward. The game gets you to explore Empire City to find power sources, which again are a lot harder to find in the powered down sections of the map, as they are not displayed on your radar. Not only do you acquire new abilities each and every time you return power to a district, but you can also upgrade your max electrical capacity by finding blast shards, irradiated earth fragments from the ray sphere explosion, that increase the amount of energy you can use before needing to recharge. What's really interesting about Infamous is that it allows the player to decide whether or not they will use Cole's power for good or evil, becoming the beloved hero of Empire City or the despised anti-hero. This is done through the game's karma system, and Cole's current karma level is indicated by the blue and red meter in the top left. The higher your level is in either of those sectors will influence certain elements of the game, Cole's physical appearance, and your overall reputation in the city. If you are acting as a hero, citizens of Empire City will begin cheering you, and may even help you out during some battles you have with criminals. But if you play as an anti-hero, they will throw rocks at you, or just walk up and punch you, interfering with your traversal and getting in the way during battles. You can change your karma alignment in several ways. Many story missions will have moments in them where you will have to make a choice, resulting in a positive or negative outcome. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. If you are choosing the path of a hero or an anti-hero, they don't need much thought, but some can be pretty difficult to make, like the one involving Trish, Cole's love interest. She gets kidnapped by the main villain, more on him in a second, and is suspended from the top of a building, along with 6 doctors, who are hanging from an adjacent one. Every instinct you have tells you to save her. After all, Cole loves her and doesn't want her to die, but the hero action is to save the doctors, because the amount of lives they will help in the end outweighs the life of just one, and accepting that, even as the player, is a hard pill to swallow. Depending on your karma level, Cole's powers will change, and some unique variations of them are only accessible when playing as a hero or anti-hero, so it adds some replayability to this game. When I played Infamous, to capture the footage for this review, I played solely as a hero, but when I get to Infamous 2, whenever that is, I will probably switch it up and play as an anti-hero, just for shits and giggles. Okay, so let's talk about this game's villains. They all center around a secret society known as the First Sons, who basically seek to enhance humanity by granting individuals powerful abilities. As the story of the game progresses, you learn that they were the ones who created the Ray Sphere and orchestrated the blast, which gave Cole his powers. The first supervillain of this game, if you will, is Sasha, a former member of the First Sons, who had worked as a scientist and mentalist within their organization. She had studied mind control techniques, and following the blast, became a conduit, able to create a black tar-like substance that she can extract from her body. Anyone exposed to it can succumb to her influence. She controls the Neon District of Empire City and leads the hooded gang known as the Reapers, which are all mentally linked to her thanks to this tar. Sasha's plan is to not only abduct civilians and gain control over their minds, but also contaminate the Neon District's water supplies. The concept behind her gives off a lot of Scarecrow vibes, with the more scary and fear-inducing type visuals. I really enjoyed some of the disorienting gameplay segments involving her, when Cole is splashed with some of the black tar, and her boss battle in the Jefferson Tunnel gets under your skin a little bit, not only with her constantly talking to you, even when you don't have a visual on her, but also when you get up close and you have to rip those tar pumps and tubes off her body. It's fucking nasty. The second villain in this game is Alden Tate, the original heir to the First Sons, who was exiled from their rankings at a young age and forced to grow up homeless on the streets. Following the blast, he would develop powerful telekinetic abilities. Using them, he would take over the Warren District of Empire City and forms an army called the Dustmen, consisting of the poor and oppressed citizens in that area. Alden would erect a massive scrap metal tower and terrorize the residents of the Warren with junk golems and crab-like creatures of his own creation. He would get his hands on the Ray Sphere and plan on activating it once more, but is stopped by Cole once and for all on the bridge, with you battling Alden in a large scrap metal armor he has made for himself, using his powers. Finally, the main antagonist of Infamous is a man by the name of Kessler. He is the leader of the First Sons, and rules over the historic district, where the site of the Ray Sphere explosion occurred. You fight him in the same place Cole woke up at the beginning of the game. Kessler is a conduit, and much like Cole, possesses the ability to channel and manipulate electricity. He can also teleport, move at superhuman speeds, and create duplicates of himself. The second this guy appears in the story, he is shrouded in mystery. The way he speaks, what he actually talks about, it's all so vague and cryptic, with double meanings at times, and keeps you guessing every step of the way. He wants to make Cole into the hero he never was, wants to show him that his actions have severe consequences, that he had to learn that lesson the hard way. Kessler is the one leading the First Sons, was behind the creation of the Ray Sphere, and was the one to orchestrate the blast that gave Cole his powers, and killed so many innocent people in Empire City. Kessler did all of this because he once lived in Empire City, when a giant humanoid creature known as the Beast had attacked it. Kessler was strong enough to take it on, and possibly defeat it, but instead decided to flee with his family, and left the rest of the city to die at its hands. The Beast would go on a path of destruction, laying waste to the world, and it was only after Kessler's wife and 2 daughters died, and he was left alone, that the guilt and grief of his previous actions caught up to him. He would use his powers to take a one-way trip back in time to rewrite history and undo all the damage he had caused. And it's at this point that the game subverts any and all expectations you have regarding this character, because Kessler is revealed to be Cole, an older version of him from the future. When I first played this game back in 2009, I thought this twist was kind of silly, but I wasn't old enough and mature enough to really respect it and what it was trying to do. The idea of someone with superpowers sacrificing everything that makes them who they are essentially to turn themselves into the ultimate villain just so they can build themselves up to be the ultimate hero is really fascinating to me. Because who better to push your buttons, rattle the cage and rub salt in those wounds than yourself? You know how you tick, you know what you value, what you care for, what will set you off and feed that flame deep inside of you. Not only did Kessler lose the love of his life in his reality, but he had to kill her again in this one, which couldn't have been easy, and shows the dedication he has to his cause, in saving the world from the beast. That's all that matters to him. So yeah, I really enjoy this idea of a character testing and challenging a younger version of themselves to be the best they can be, by becoming the ultimate villain for them. It's kind of cool. Up until the release of Infamous, nothing like this had ever been done before in the superhero genre, been attempted, and I don't think anything like it has happened since, to my knowledge. It's a very unique direction for a story, a very ambitious direction for a story, and easily one of the most impressive aspects of the Infamous game as a whole. With all that said, Kessler isn't a perfect villain by any means. The twist behind who he is and why he is doing everything is great, but the more you think about all the little intricacies outside of that, the more his story, and the writing to it itself, becomes confusing, nonsensical, and starts to unravel a little bit. Because this game implements the use of time travel, that opens up a can of worms, and creates a bit of a paradox. I'd like to know how Kessler got his powers originally. Did someone have to go back in time and set off a race sphere for him? Or is this just another chicken or the egg scenario, in that it's impossible to determine who or what came first? You could argue that his powers just developed naturally with his conduit gene over time, but it's not like the X-Men. I assumed this shit had to be activated by a race sphere. I could be wrong though. The other gripe I have with Kessler is his plan itself. I get that he wants to make Cole into a hero, the type of hero he never was, but how he goes about accomplishing that comes off as a bit convoluted and contrived in areas. For starters, he can time travel, but how? The game doesn't explain it, nor does it explain why he can only do it one way, and that's it. I also wonder why he couldn't have just spilled the beans to Cole right from the get-go. It seemed like such a waste of time, energy, and resources to go through with all of this elaborate scheming behind the scenes. For what? He's still giving Cole the choice to be a hero or not. Kessler is still allowing his younger self to make that decision. All of his work could get flushed down the shitter within seconds. Why set himself up for potential failure like that, on such a grand scale no less? The other big question one has when playing this game is why Kessler decided to go after himself, go after Cole. Why not instead use your time-traveling power to track down the beast, find out where it came from, what it is, and of course stop it before it ever even attacked Empire City in the first place? That seems like the easier and more logical path for him to follow, the path with least resistance. Now, of course, the game's sequel, Infamous 2, would answer a lot of questions surrounding the Beast, as it acts as that game's primary antagonist. We do learn what it is, who it is, and that, interestingly enough, it was created by Kessler in a roundabout sort of way. His journey back in time to turn Cole into a hero inadvertently created the very thing Kessler was trying to defeat in the first place, which is kind of hilarious, really. It had been quite a long time since I had played Infamous, close to 10 years by my calculations. I still think it holds up rather strongly, all things considered. Its electricity-based combat and traversal systems are probably its strongest aspect. They were unique at the time, and I still think they are fairly unique even to this day. I love the different ways the game allows you to manipulate electricity, with all the different types of moves you have at your disposal, and I love that it finds that balance too, not making you feel too overpowered, and has you recharge your energy by finding power sources nearby. Infamous has its fair share of problems, all games do. The graphics haven't aged the best in all areas, and some of the in-game cutscenes have the characters move in very awkward and robotic ways. Infamous features a bit too many escort missions for my liking, where you have to protect a certain character, a vehicle, or in one instance, defend two construction workers that are on either sides of a bridge trying to lower it in a sequence that seems to last far longer than it really needs to. Infamous's narrative isn't perfect in every aspect. You could argue that some of the characters are kind of cliché, or maybe even a bit uninteresting, because a dark and somber story like this, as well as setting, they aren't for everyone, and I get that. But for an original superhero story, one that was built from the ground up, and not relying on any big names from Marvel or DC for example, it's quite impressive. And as superhero games go, this one is pretty damn fun. It's a lot better than some of the games we have seen released based on the big name characters, so that's saying something. I want to thank everyone for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it, and I want to thank everyone for voting for this game review of Infamous over on Patreon.com. Your support over there makes video projects like this possible. If you would like to take part in the monthly polls that determine which superhero or comic book related video games I take a look at on the channel, all you have to do is become a patron and join any of my tiers. I will see you all in the next video. Take care and stay nerdy.